Hi, this is Mr. McLean. In this video, we're going to focus in on some of the practical applications of DNA technology as well as genetic engineering. Um, in this section, we'll spend a lot of our time talking about the benefits in regards to medical diagnostics. Um, so one of the first things that is really critical today is the ability for us to use PCR to be able to sequence specific genomes. So, for example, um, it may be used to identify disease-causing organisms. One of the techniques that's heavily being used in our evaluation of the coronavirus is to be able to use PCR in regards to the viral genomes and to try to match that up and to be able to make a conclusive analysis if a person is positive or negative for a particular presence of that virus. We could also be taking a look at disease-causing mutations by looking for certain single nucleotide polymorphisms that have been identified with that. That would give us diagnostic capability of being able to determine if somebody is prone to heart disease or various other types of risk factors. We also want to take a look at the application of biotechnology towards things such as gene therapy. And when we start to take a look at gene therapy, the promise is that in the future, we'll be able to make corrections in the genes that are causing the problems as opposed to just dealing with the symptoms of a particular problem. So there's a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of challenges that go along with that. Um, One of the first things that we need to understand is that there has to be a delivery method, and that's a vector. So a vector is something that's going to deliver the genes into the specific type of cells that we're looking at. So for example, if we wanted to get our genetic information into the bone marrow, we're going to have to use a vector to be able to do that. So one of the things that has been used a lot throughout the past has been to use different types of retroviral vectors. And basically what they will do is they will edit the genome of that retrovirus. So in this particular case there, they've gone through there and they've rendered that virus as harmless. And then they've been able to incorporate the corrected gene into that viral genome. And then at that particular point, the virus is allowed to infect the individual along with the new gene that we're trying to bring in. So the virus will infect the bone marrow cells in these particular individuals. And the idea is that if enough of that genetic code is incorporated into those cells, the viral DNA containing that will actually start to produce the proteins that we're looking for. So that's one of the methods where it's been beneficial, and it's going to work best if you're able to get it into cells that are going to continue to proliferate and to be able to build large populations. There's also been some positive impacts from gene therapy when we battle things such as vision related issues. So there's definitely some work that's been successful where they've taken a look at some regeneration associated with retinal damage and being able to incorporate DNA to give us some benefits from that. One of the first times that there was evidence of success in this particular area of applying gene therapy was in a 2000 trial that took place over in France. And what they were doing is they were working with children that had severe combined immunodeficiency disorder, and they had a study group of 10 of these children. And within 2 years, 9 of the kids started to show significant improvement, and they were treated with a retrovirus that had been modified to carry the corrected gene, and it started to develop inside the body and cells, and it started to give the children some capability of having an immune system. One of the secondary effects, though, that did show up is that in that small population, 3 of the patients developed leukemia, and at least one of them had died from the leukemia. So there were definitely some questions about whether or not that incorporated gene had in some way altered the proliferation of those cells. Another case that took place early on in gene therapy was the Jesse Gelsinger case, and that was in September of 1999. And in this particular case, this boy was 17 or 18 years old, and what he had was he had a rare metabolic disorder, but he really wasn't suffering from it at that particular point. He wasn't sick, but he did participate in a gene therapy trial that was carried out at the University of Pennsylvania, and they were trying to develop a test of the safety of this treatment that would eventually be used on babies. And unfortunately, his body went into a very aggressive response to this. He went into a shock. He had massive organ failure, and he did pass away as a result of the failed trials of that. So that really, even today, more than 20 years later, is often cited as something that we need to be cautious as we kind of move forward through there. So there's definitely what we would say technical challenges and issues that go along with gene therapy even today. And one of the questions is, how can that activity of the transfer gene ultimately be controlled, and how can it be sure to make sure that you're getting the appropriate amount of that gene product? And the other thing is, how do we make sure that there's no damage that happens to the rest of the genome as a result of incorporating those genes? Now, today we have CRISPR technology, and we'd watched a video earlier in this chapter that talked about how CRISPR could make directed cuts. So here we have the Cas9 system, as well as the guided RNA, and you notice that it's going to make a cut, and if we use the repair enzymes as well as the corrected gene, the idea is that we're going to be able to incorporate some of those corrected genes. So in laboratory animals, we've had some pretty positive results, some different tests that have been done. There was a test where they were mimicking human disease situations by creating mutations in laboratory mice and then trying to incorporate corrected genes to see if they could get positive outcomes. And there's definitely some positive results coming from that. There still are major challenges technically as well as ethically associated with CRISPR. In fact, there's been a worldwide moratorium on how we study human research in regards to this. There's at this time right now, it's not acceptable to do human gene therapy manipulation on whole organisms using this technology. There were definitely been some situations where there's been reports of some success with that coming out of China. One of the reports indicated that a set of twins pre-birth were modified using CRISPR technology. And basically what they did is they disabled one of the receptors that allowed for HIV infection, and they showed that they could basically disable that receptor and allow for somewhat of an immunity against that particular type of infection. But at this particular point in history, there's still a lot of questions associated with that. Some of the other questions that come in with CRISPR in regards to ethical questions is the question of enhancement versus therapy. So when we start to take a look at are we able to make modifications and things that would benefit the overall health versus are they changes that might provide enhancement characteristics? So there's a lot of ethical questions that can kind of go along with that. Obviously, the pharmaceutical industry has greatly benefited from the biotechnology, and we've had some of these modern drugs that have been introduced as a result of that. One of the first really promising new generation drugs was known as Gleevec, and what it did is it worked to inhibit an overexpression of a receptor found in people that suffered from CML leukemia. So it was really one of the first drugs that was capable of showing a cure for a particular type of cancer. One of the problems that we still see, though, is that when they've sequenced genomes of different cancer patients, they found that they studied some before and after exposure to the drug, and in some cases, we've seen the complete evolution of the cancer genomes. So the mutations and the changes are still potentially there. We've also talked about using cell cultures to make large quantities of certain products. This has been going on for some time. Probably the biggest products that are made would be insulin as well as growth hormones. And we also use it in some of the vaccine production. Another idea is using animals, particularly farm animals, to make them transgenic, which means that we would incorporate genes from a different species, in this case a human, into the animal. And when the animal would produce milk products, those products would have the proteins that would be necessary to help deal with a particular problem. So in this case, they're talking about a protein that would be beneficial to help with clotting related issues. So that's definitely a benefit from what we would see in regards to biotech. When we take a look at the legal field, there's definitely significant emphasis on forensic studies, and you can pretty much watch any crime show and take a look at how that entire field of criminal justice has completely become reliant upon genetic profiles. Most people in the field prefer the term genetic profile as opposed to DNA fingerprint, just that they're showing that it's definitely a genetic basis to this. But the first application at the FBI level started in 1988, and they were using gel electrophoresis and some nucleic acid hybridization. They would basically cut up fragments from suspected individuals and run them on a gel and be able to create a pattern. That relied on about 1,000 cells, and that technology improved dramatically. So today, most of the tests are looking at what's called STR, short tandem repeats. So basically, all of us have a very unique set of repeating patterns of a code within our genome, and the idea is that we can take as little as 20 cells and we can amplify that sample very significantly using PCR. So that's going to give you lots of copies, and then they can run those samples on a gel electrophoresis. And we only look at 13 regions, but if you look at these statistics, it's pretty amazing. So just by looking at 13 STR regions in a human, the chance that two non-identical twins would have that same pattern ranges anywhere from 1 in 10 billion to 1 in several trillion. And keep in mind that that's more than the number of people on the earth. One of the first really significant cases was Earl Washington. This guy was convicted and sentenced to death for a rape that supposedly took place in 1982. He was convicted in 1984. In 1993, they adjusted his sentence to a life sentence based on some questions and doubts. And then in the year 2000, it did STR evidence. And basically what they found is that after 17 years in jail, this guy was not at the scene. He was not the suspect that should have been arrested for this particular crime. And if we look at the STR markers, this is evidence from the crime scene. So they looked at 3 different regions, and you can see that this Tinsley had a match, and Washington did not have a match as we look at all these areas. Eventually, Tinsley, who was already in jail for a similar crime, admitted to it, and Washington was released. Other uses deal with environmental cleanup. We also have bacterial or agricultural applications. One of the big things that goes along with agricultural uses would be genetically modified organisms where they're able to transfer some of the benefits, such as being resistant to certain pests or having certain characteristics that will boost certain nutrient qualities and things of that nature. So these are definitely challenges and questions associated with this. And as we move forward, we'll continue to examine these different ideas. Hope that was helpful.